Every morning, like clockwork, a German shepherd named Kaiser stands by the wrought iron fence in Heidelberg, peering down the cobblestone path that winds past his family's ivy-draped house. The moment a lone stranger appears clad in a long, dark coat, Kaiser erupts into urgent, booming barks. His alarm echoes through the tranquil neighborhood, startling passers-by who can't help but wonder, why this man? Why every single day? There's an old saying that dogs sense danger before humans ever do. As Kaiser's vigilant eyes follow the stranger's every move, a subtle tension weaves itself into the quiet routine, hinting at secrets buried deep beneath the surface. Heidelberg's historic charm radiates through its narrow lanes and centuries-old architecture. The city, nestled along the banks of the Neckar River, is known for the storied Heidelberg Castle, perched high on a hill, and for the University of Heidelberg's stately halls. Visitors wander its romantic alleys, seeking a taste of Germany's past, photographing half-timbered houses and sunlit squares. But for the Brenner family, Martin, Hannah, and their 8-year-old daughter Elsa, home is a cozy stone cottage on a quiet street. Its gray facade wears a mantle of thick ivy, and a small garden bursts with wildflowers whenever spring breezes bring renewed life. It's the perfect haven for their beloved German shepherd, Kaiser. Kaiser wasn't always called Kaiser. When Hannah found him in a local animal shelter, his previous owners had named him Brutus. He had been surrendered after a string of misunderstandings. He barked too loudly, needed more exercise than they could manage, and grew anxious when left alone for hours on end. But from the moment Hannah locked eyes with him, she felt an instant connection. She knelt by his cage, offering a gentle hand through the bars. The large dog approached timidly, sniffing at her fingers, and pressed his muzzle into her palm. Martin, ever the pragmatic husband, was a little skeptical. "He's big," he observed, glancing at the muscular frame and dense sable fur. The dog's intelligent eyes flicked from Martin to Hannah, as though measuring whether they were trustworthy. Hannah smiled. "I know," she said, "but there's something about him. He's gentle. He just needs a real home." They visited the shelter a few more times, bringing Elsa along. The girl's face lit up the second she saw the majestic shepherd. By the second visit, Brutus was waiting eagerly at the cage door, tail thumping with hope. "We'll call you Kaiser," Elsa announced, patting his head through the chain link. The name stuck, and soon the shelter staff were calling him Kaiser too. When they took him home, Hannah thought about how the name Kaiser meant emperor in German, a title that captured his regal bearing. Yet for all his imposing appearance, Kaiser showed a heart full of warmth, never hesitating to follow Elsa around the yard or settle at her feet while she read him storybooks. He was an active, alert dog who needed space to roam. Mornings became a cherished ritual of long walks along the Neckar River, with Martin holding Kaiser's leash as the dog trotted beside him, sniffing the crisp air and greeting joggers with a friendly tail wag. In the afternoons, when Elsa returned from school, she'd toss a frisbee in the yard until Kaiser bounded after it, bounding across the dandelions with unbridled joy. At night, he curled up on a plush dog bed in the living room, content to be near his family. His favorite treat was real bratwurst, an indulgence Martin sometimes sneaked him during family cookouts, though the veterinarian, Dr. Hirsch at the Tierärztliche Klinik im Kornmarkt, repeatedly warned them about spoiling Kaiser's diet. Life with Kaiser was good. The family's daily routine, from Elsa's giggles as she peppered Kaiser's snout with kisses to Martin's grumbling about picking up dog hair, was suffused with the warmth that only a beloved pet can bring. But then, a few months into this idyllic arrangement, Kaiser's behavior took a sharp turn. It started one crisp autumn morning. The leaves on the maple tree near their house had turned a shimmering gold, and a gentle breeze carried the smell of damp earth. Hannah was in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Martin was reading the morning newspaper, and Elsa was finishing up her math homework. Kaiser sat by the window, his ears pricked in keen alertness. Suddenly, he let out a low growl. Elsa looked up. "What is it, boy?" She hurried over to the window and peered out. Kaiser growled again. Through the glass, Elsa noticed a tall man in a dark coat walking slowly up the cobblestone street. The man had his head bowed, as though in deep thought. Nothing looked particularly menacing about him. He seemed like any ordinary passerby, but Kaiser's reaction was unusual. Day after day, that same man walked by at roughly the same time. At first, Martin and Hannah assumed it was simply a neighbor or a commuter heading somewhere, but Kaiser's alarm escalated. He began barking, a sharp, warning bark, every time the stranger appeared. He dashed to the gate, pressing his muzzle through the wrought iron bars, hackles slightly raised. At first, Martin tried to calm him. "Easy, Kaiser. It's just a man walking by." But the dog refused to relent, each bark carrying a tense, urgent note. The intensity grew so pronounced that Hannah started to worry. They'd never seen Kaiser so distressed. He barked at passing dogs sometimes, or at the mail carrier if startled. But this was a different kind of reaction, more focused, almost personal. Martin considered approaching the stranger and introducing himself, hoping to alleviate Kaiser's alarm. But the man never lingered long. He walked with purpose, rarely looking up or around. He was past the house in under a minute, leaving Kaiser growling at disappearing footsteps. On a few occasions, Hannah tried to watch him inconspicuously from the window. The man's face was pale, etched with lines that suggested age or worry, hard to tell from a distance. His hair, what little could be seen beneath the brim of a dark hat on colder days, was mostly gray. She thought he looked old enough to be retired, but there was something about him that made the hair on her arms prickle. She couldn't say what. "He's harmless," Martin insisted. "Maybe Kaiser just doesn't like the smell of his coat or something." Yet Elsa disagreed, feeling in her young heart that Kaiser's agitation was no coincidence. "Dogs can smell fear and sense bad intentions," she offered, repeating something she'd read. Hannah tried to reassure her, but she found herself glancing out the window more often than usual, as if she too believed that some hidden darkness lurked beyond their property. Weeks stretched on, and the stranger continued his daily walk. If he noticed the dog's hostility, he gave no sign of being disturbed. He didn't try to greet Kaiser or hush him. He never even glanced toward the Brenner household. He simply passed, day after day, carrying the same small black briefcase. One chilly morning in late November, Hannah decided she'd had enough of the uncertainty. The sky was overcast, with a bitter wind promising winter's rapid approach. She bundled Elsa into her coat for school, put on a scarf, and stood in the yard at the precise time the stranger usually walked by. Kaiser waited by the fence, muscles tense. As the clock struck 8:00 a.m., the stranger appeared, stepping over dried leaves that crackled underfoot. Immediately, Kaiser began barking, his stance protective beside Hannah. Determined, she raised her hand in a friendly wave. "Good morning," she called. Her voice carried on the cold air, but the man didn't look up. Instead, he hesitated for the briefest moment, almost imperceptibly, and then continued. From the corner of his eye, it seemed like he flicked a glance at Kaiser, whose barking reverberated off stone walls. Yet still, he said nothing. Something about that fleeting eye contact unsettled Hannah. It was as though the man recognized Kaiser, recognized the family even, but willed himself to ignore them. Her mother's intuition, that deep-seated sense that something was amiss, nagged at her. That evening, after Elsa went to bed, Hannah voiced her concerns to Martin. "I don't want to be paranoid, but something about this feels off," she said, stirring sugar into her tea. "Kaiser's never behaved like this, not once. And the man, he acts like we don't exist, but not in a normal way. I can't explain it." Martin shrugged. "Dogs bark for all kinds of reasons. He might have a certain smell, or perhaps he's had a bad experience with a man who looks like him in the past." Hannah considered that. She remembered the staff at the shelter mentioning Kaiser had been rehomed multiple times before they got him. Possibly, the sight of a particular coat or a certain style of gait triggered painful memories. Maybe, she allowed, though her heart remained unsettled. In a gesture of comfort, Martin squeezed her hand. He'll lose interest eventually, he predicted. Dogs adapt. If there's no real threat, Kaiser's instincts will settle down. But Martin's words rang hollow against the dog's unyielding vigilance. Every day the man appeared, and every day Kaiser erupted into barking, urgent, warning, unrelenting. Winter arrived, blanketing Heidelberg in a gentle dusting of snow that accented the city's romantic architecture. Christmas markets appeared, with stalls selling roasted chestnuts and mulled wine, wreaths of pine and ornaments glinting in the flickering glow of string lights. The Brenners decorated their living room with a small fir tree. Elsa hung ornaments while humming carols, and Kaiser lay beside her, ears perked, watching as if in quiet fascination. Despite the cheerful season, the question of Kaiser's stranger weighed on Hannah's mind. One night, after placing a festive wreath on the front door, she found herself recalling the day they adopted Kaiser. The shelter staff had told them Kaiser suffered from previous trauma, but the details were vague. The man who surrendered him had claimed Kaiser was a stray before adopting him. Records were incomplete. Hannah wondered now if the mysterious stranger triggered a memory in Kaiser, perhaps a face from the dog's painful past. When she relayed these thoughts to Dr. Hirsch during a routine checkup, the veterinarian frowned. "Dogs remember scents more than faces," he said, listening to Kaiser's heartbeat with a stethoscope. "But if that man smells similar to someone who hurt Kaiser, it could trigger anxious or protective behavior." Hannah nodded, though the veterinarian's hypothesis didn't quell her unease. "Kaiser doesn't just bark anxiously," she clarified. "It's like he's warning us, like he's saying, 'Stay away from my family.' It's protective, but also, there's something else." Dr. Hirsch paused. "Animals have instincts we can't fully comprehend," he said softly. "If it continues, you might consider gently introducing them. Sometimes exposure helps, but trust your gut, and trust Kaiser's." It happened 2 days before Christmas, under a cold midwinter sun. Elsa was off school, giggling inside with Martin, as they built a gingerbread house. Hannah had stepped out to the garden to fetch a few branches of pine for holiday decorations. Kaiser followed her, bounding through small patches of snow. She was about to head back inside when she heard footsteps on the lane. The stranger was early. Kaiser froze, every muscle tensed. Then he began barking deep, throaty, resonant. Hannah glanced up, expecting the man to pass by quickly as he always did. This time, something changed. He stopped. It was the first time Hannah had seen him pause, so near their fence. She could feel her heart skip a beat. "Kaiser, it's okay," she said softly, placing a calming hand on his flank. But Kaiser's barks escalated, echoing across the snowy street. His breath formed small clouds in the air. The stranger turned his head just enough for Hannah to catch a partial glimpse of his face beneath a wool cap. Pale blue eyes, hollow with sorrow or worry, she couldn't tell which. He hesitated for a few seconds, lips parted as though he might speak. Then he clenched his jaw, dropped his gaze, and resumed walking. Kaiser continued barking long after the man vanished around the corner. Hannah stood there, pulse hammering. In those few moments, she'd sensed something raw in that man's eyes, something that almost resembled fear. She couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't simply Kaiser who was on edge. Perhaps the stranger was too. That evening, the Brenners hosted a small gathering for the holidays. Their friends from down the street, Miriam and Lucas, came over, bearing homemade stollen and bottles of Riesling. Laughter and holiday carols filled the house. Kaiser, who normally reveled in attention, was unusually subdued. He lingered by the window, occasionally peeking out into the wintry night, as if expecting that ominous figure to appear even after dark. The conversation turned to local gossip, as often happens when friends gather around the dining table. Miriam mentioned an unusual rumor spreading among some neighbors. "They say an old man moved back into the big brown house at the end of the lane. The one that used to belong to the Leitner family," she said, slicing a piece of stollen. Lucas nodded. I've seen him a few times, passing by on my way to work. Keeps to himself. Miriam leaned in conspiratorially. Word is, the place belonged to his grandmother decades ago. He disappeared during his youth, traveled who knows where, and now he's back, rummaging through old memories. No one seems to know why. A chill ran down Hannah's spine. The location Miriam described was just a short walk from their cottage, precisely the route the stranger took each morning. She shared a look with Martin, who furrowed his brow. While the others speculated about inherited property and quiet recluses, Hannah's thoughts wandered to the hollow look in the man's eyes that morning. Was this the same person who'd purchased that old house? Something told her that it had to be. An unspoken question lodged itself in her mind. What had drawn him back to Heidelberg after so long? Over the holidays, Kaiser began experiencing nightmares, or what seemed like nightmares for a dog. Late at night, while the family slept, he would whimper and paw at the air, chest heaving in distress. Once or twice, he even barked in his sleep, waking the household in a flurry of alarm. Hannah would rush downstairs to find him panting, eyes wide, scanning the dimly lit living room as if expecting danger. These nightmares are new, Martin noted one morning, concern evident in his voice. He used to sleep through the night. Hannah nodded, stroking Kaiser's fur as he whined softly. I think he's remembering something. Something that upset him may be related to this man. Both parents exchanged worried glances. They had initially hoped the dog's barking spree would fizzle out once Kaiser realized the stranger meant no harm. But instead, it was getting worse. Kaiser's agitation now haunted him even in sleep. Then came a cold January afternoon. The sky, a dull gray. Hannah and Elsa decided to walk Kaiser together in the direction of the old brown house that supposedly belonged to the mysterious stranger. Hannah's curiosity burned. She wanted to see if Kaiser reacted to the property, or if there was some clue that might explain his behavior. They strolled in silence, save for the crunch of salt on the sidewalks. Elsa clung to Kaiser's leash, but the dog seemed reluctant, like he was being led to a place he'd rather avoid. As they neared the house, Kaiser started whining. The structure was indeed old, tall, and somewhat foreboding, with shutters latched over grimy windows. A chain-link fence surrounded a neglected garden, where dead leaves piled against a rusty bench. Hannah spotted a nameplate by the gate. Leitner. Snow had partially obscured the letters, but they were still legible. There was no sign of the occupant, though smoke curled from a chimney, indicating someone was inside. Kaiser sniffed the air, whined again, and then suddenly pulled away. He wanted to leave. They didn't linger. Elsa looked uneasy, and Hannah felt a prickle of unease beneath her coat. On the walk back, Kaiser kept glancing behind them, as though expecting the occupant to emerge and follow. But no one did. By the time they returned home, Hannah's mind buzzed with questions. She realized that, ironically, she knew next to nothing about Kaiser's life before they adopted him. All she had were scraps of references from the shelter mentions of a difficult past, but no details. What if the stranger was part of that past? The timing and location seemed too coincidental to dismiss. Determined to uncover Kaiser's history, Hannah went to the shelter where they'd adopted him. She found the volunteer who'd been on duty that day, a silver-haired woman named Brigitte, who remembered how quickly Kaiser had taken to Hannah and Elsa. Brigitte dug through a filing cabinet. I'll see what we have, she said, pulling out a thin folder labeled Brutus. Inside, there were a few pages of notes. He arrived last year, brought in by a man named Klaus. Klaus said he found him wandering near Mannheim, but we never could verify that story. Another man adopted him for a month, but returned him. We're not sure why. Hannah flipped through the documents. The medical records showed only standard vaccinations. Then she spotted something in the corner of one page, a note about a previous microchip. This says Kaiser had a microchip from a different owner, Hannah said, pointing. Brigitte nodded. Yes, we scanned him. The microchip was registered to a man named Georg Leitner, but the contact information was out of date. Letters we sent were returned undelivered. We didn't investigate further because often dogs change hands, and sometimes the microchip records aren't updated. Hannah's stomach dropped. She could barely breathe. Leitner was the same name on the old house in Heidelberg, the same house that the stranger supposedly moved into. Could it be the same family? Do you have a first name besides Jorg for the registration? Hannah asked breathlessly. No, just Jorg, Brigitte replied. We tried calling the phone number, but it was disconnected. Hannah left the shelter feeling as if someone had poured ice water down her spine. The name Leitner echoed in her head, replaying every time she thought of Kaiser's daily vigil and the old house. She clutched the file, her heart pounding with more questions than answers. If Kaiser's original owner was someone from the Leitner family, then perhaps the unknown stranger was related to that same line. Maybe even Jorg's son or nephew. Winter wore on. The days were short, the nights interminably long. Kaiser's barking continued, unwavering. Each morning at 8 o'clock sharp, the stranger appeared at the edge of the Brenner's property. The dog would leap to the fence, barking as though he discovered a thief creeping in the shadows. The man passed by without a word, every single time. Despite Hannah's newfound suspicion, she knew no easy way to confirm the connection. The idea of confronting the stranger directly both frightened and intrigued her. She felt a mother's fierce protectiveness over Kaiser, even as she recognized he wasn't just a pet, but a living link to a hidden chapter of someone's life. The breakthrough came on a bitterly cold morning in February. Snowflakes drifted lazily from a dull sky. Hannah stood on the porch with Kaiser, bracing against an icy wind, hoping to reason with the stranger one more time, if not for her own curiosity, then for Kaiser's peace of mind. Sure enough, the familiar figure rounded the corner. This time, though, Kaiser didn't merely bark. He howled, a sound that resonated with heartbreak and rage. It brought a lump to Hannah's throat. The man paused, as he had once before, then slowly approached the fence. Kaiser barked louder, but Hannah stood firm. Please, she called, voice trembling. Please talk to me. She clutched Kaiser's collar, preventing him from lunging at the gate. Up close, the stranger's eyes were indeed a pale blue, ringed by exhaustion. His face was etched with deep lines, sadness or guilt. Hannah wasn't sure which. He took a shaky breath. Your dog, he said haltingly. He used to be mine. Hannah's mouth went dry. The words reverberated between them. Kaiser continued barking, straining against Hannah's hold, evidently not recognizing the man as a friend. Or perhaps he did, and that was the problem. The stranger's eyes flicked to Kaiser. I didn't know he survived, he whispered. In the midst of a frigid winter morning, Hannah felt as if the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Who are you? She managed, her voice tight. He exhaled, wincing at Kaiser's relentless snarls. My name is Jacob Leitner. Jorg was my father. The truth, so long suspected, sent a jolt of adrenaline through Hannah. She swallowed hard. This dog was registered to your father. Her words came out in a rush. But how? Why? Jacob ran a trembling hand over his mouth. It's a long story. I left Heidelberg many years ago. After my father died, we had many dogs at that old house for security and other reasons. He paused, looking pained. But Kaiser, or Brutus as we called him then, was different. He was my father's favorite. Kaiser growled, ears pinned back, tail stiff. Jacob's eyes glistened, his gaze flicking between Hannah and the distressed shepherd. I never intended to leave him, but circumstances forced me away. My father was involved in some dangerous affairs. I had no choice but to leave. A swirl of conflicting emotions welled up in Hannah. On one hand, the man's revelation corroborated what she'd found in the shelter's files. On the other, Kaiser's reaction made it clear that something traumatic had happened. She found her voice, though it quavered. Why is he so afraid of you? Jacob's eyes glistened with regret. He's not afraid of me. He's afraid of what I brought into that house. My father had dealings, criminal dealings. We had people in and out, dangerous people. I was young and terrified. When my father passed, I fled. I left Brutus behind, and I never forgave myself. He spoke in a halting murmur, voice muffled by the swirl of snow. Each word weighed heavy with guilt. Hannah could scarcely believe it. She looked at Kaiser, who barked as though the confession itself was a threat. In that moment, Elsa peeked out of the door, drawn by the commotion. "Mama, is everything okay?" she asked, eyes wide at the sight of the trembling man by the fence. Hannah waved Elsa back inside. "Yes, sweetheart, go back in and stay with Daddy." Slowly, she turned to Jacob. "Why are you here now?" Jacob's jaw clenched. "I inherited the house when my father died. I left Heidelberg to escape. But, over the years, guilt grew unbearable. I felt compelled to return, to face my past, find out what happened to the dog I abandoned. When I learned the house was sold at auction, unpaid taxes, back debts, I purchased it back. I wanted to see if he was still here, or if he'd moved on. I never dreamed he'd be living just a few streets away, nor that he'd hate me this much." Hannah's heart hammered in her chest. This man's sorrowful confession stirred equal parts sympathy and alarm. The mention of dangerous affairs made her uneasy, yet she couldn't ignore the sincerity in Jacob's voice. It was as though he bore the weight of a lifetime of regret. At last, she spoke. "Kaiser isn't just a dog. He's part of our family now," she said softly. "And if he's barking at you every day, there must be a reason he can't forgive you." Tears glistened in Jacob's eyes. For a moment, he looked as though he might speak, but instead, he turned away abruptly, trudging through the snow. Kaiser's barking followed him, echoing off the cold stone walls. In the days that followed, the stranger's revelations left Hannah conflicted. She told Martin everything. He listened soberly, then shook his head. If Kaiser was forced to witness or endure trauma in that old house, his memories won't just vanish, Martin remarked. But what do we do now? Elsa was also filled in on certain details, though her parents left out the more ominous references to criminal dealings. She only knew that Kaiser's old owner had come back, racked with guilt. The news unsettled her. "Will he try to take Kaiser away?" she asked fearfully. "No," Hannah said gently, hugging her daughter. "Kaiser's ours. We adopted him fair and square." But the question of the man's presence hung like a dark cloud over their daily routine. Kaiser continued his barking vigil. At 8 o'clock sharp, Jacob continued to pass by, though on some days, he walked on the opposite side of the street, as if to avoid the dog's fury. On others, he paused just long enough to glance over, as though yearning to fix a mistake that could never be undone. The chilling secret behind Jacob's past grew more urgent one freezing February night. Martin was working late, and Elsa was in bed when Hannah heard a metallic clatter outside. Alarmed, she peered through the kitchen window and saw nothing but darkness. Kaiser, however, sprang to attention, growling low in his throat. Adrenaline surged through Hannah. Was it a burglar? A wild animal? She quietly opened the back door, Kaiser at her side. Snow crunched under her boots as they stepped into the yard. The moon cast eerie shadows on the garden fence. That's when she saw them, two figures, hunched over near the side of the house, wearing dark clothes. One had a flashlight, shining it on the basement window. An instant wave of fear crashed over her. She was about to shout for them to leave when Kaiser broke free, charging with a ferocious bark. The intruders recoiled in panic. One bolted, but the other stumbled in the snow. Hannah screamed, fumbling for her phone to call the police. Kaiser circled the fallen stranger, barking and snarling. The intruder scrambled to his feet, brandishing a metal rod as if to ward off the dog. Kaiser lunged. Terror flashed in Hannah's eyes. She was afraid someone might get hurt. She yelled, "Kaiser, no!" But he was in full protective mode, determined to shield his home and family. Then, from somewhere behind the fence, a male voice roared, "Stand back!" It was Jacob. Before Hannah could process his presence, he vaulted over the low wall, flinging himself between the intruder and Kaiser. The momentary chaos was a blur of barks, curses, and flailing limbs. The intruder swung the rod, narrowly missing Jacob's head. Enraged, Kaiser snapped at the man's wrist. He yelped and dropped the rod. Within seconds, the intruder scrambled to his feet and dashed off into the darkness, slipping in the snowy yard. His companion had already fled. Hannah realized she was shaking uncontrollably. Kaiser's barking still ricocheted against the winter air. Jacob turned, gasping for breath, and met Hannah's wide-eyed stare. A bruise was already forming on his cheekbone, and blood trickled from a scratch on his neck. "Are you all right?" he asked hoarsely. Hannah nodded shakily. "I think so. Elsa's inside. She's safe." She ran forward, pressing a frantic hand to Kaiser's collar. The dog was trembling with adrenaline, his teeth bared, hackles up. But he didn't lunge at Jacob. Martin arrived shortly after the police. The officers combed the property, taking statements, searching for clues. They concluded that the intruders had likely been opportunistic thieves, trying to break into the basement for valuables. "Lucky your dog scared them off," one officer remarked, giving Kaiser a respectful nod. But as the swirling red and blue lights illuminated the yard, it was impossible not to notice how Jacob hovered at the perimeter, shivering under the strobing glow, as though haunted by old ghosts. It was also impossible to ignore that Kaiser, though still bristling, had allowed Jacob to shield him in the fray. Once the police left, the adrenaline receded, leaving Hannah exhausted and trembling. Martin wrapped her in his coat. Elsa, woken by the commotion, peeked through the window, eyes wide with fear and concern. Jacob lingered, uncertain. At first, Hannah wondered if he would vanish into the shadows, fleeing whatever guilt he carried. Yet he stayed. In the hush of the post-midnight hour, he rubbed his arms for warmth and looked at Hannah and Martin with equal parts apology and resolution. "I never wanted any more violence in my life," he began softly. Kaiser lay nearby, panting, still on edge. "When my father died, I ran off to Berlin, thinking I could escape the legacy. But the world never lets us outrun our past. I got into trouble of my own debts, mostly. Bad people always find ways to exploit the vulnerable." He gave a hollow chuckle, though there was no mirth in his eyes. "I told myself I'd never come back to Heidelberg, but I had nowhere else to go. I didn't even know if Brutus Kaiser was alive. Part of me hoped he'd found a better home." Hannah placed a trembling hand on Kaiser's flank. The dog's ears twitched. "He's with us now," she whispered, swallowing a lump in her throat. "He's safe." Jacob nodded, clearing tears from his eyes. "You have to understand, my father wasn't just some petty criminal. He ran a ring that trafficked stolen goods, sometimes guns. I was a teenager, powerless. He'd tie the dogs in the basement whenever his associates arrived. They were mostly neglected, except for Brutus, who he prized as a guard dog. But even Brutus had his share of cruel training. I tried to stop it sometimes, but I was too young." He swallowed hard. "They taught him to attack, not with love, not with patience through fear." Kaiser whined softly, as though the memory lingered in some dark recess of his mind. Hannah felt tears welling, her heart clenching with pity for the dog. "When my father died, the ring scattered. I was left with the house. Men came looking for debts owed, for merchandise. I panicked. I left the city with what little money I had. Brutus was there. I knew I should have taken him, but I was terrified. I barely escaped with my life. I've regretted it ever since." The yard was silent, except for a soft rustling of night wind through barren trees. Martin stared at Jacob, face torn between anger and sympathy. "So you came back to atone for your father's crimes?" Jacob nodded. "Yes, or maybe just to face the consequences. I found out that the house had been repossessed, so I bought it back. A foolish thing. I can't afford it. But I had to see if there was anything left of the life I abandoned." Hannah exhaled slowly. The entire story felt like a dark tapestry unraveling before her. Now, at last, Kaiser's persistent barking at Jacob made sense. The dog recognized not just the man, but the trauma that accompanied him. Jacob was a living, breathing reminder of those early days of fear and brutality. Yet tonight, he had rushed to help them, risking his safety to protect the dog he had once failed. There, in the cold and moonlit yard, Hannah felt something shift. Perhaps Kaiser felt it too, an old wound tearing open but also airing out, a chance to heal. Still, the question lingered, could trust ever be rebuilt? Over the following weeks, Jacob remained in Heidelberg. The attempted break-in at the Brenner's house prompted more neighborhood watch initiatives. For a while, everyone was on high alert. Martin installed stronger locks and extra lighting around the property. The memory of that terrifying night slowly receded, but the bruise on Jacob's cheek was a tangible reminder of the danger they had faced and faced together. Kaiser's bark still filled the air each morning, though it began to soften. Jacob no longer walked by at the exact same time. He varied his route, occasionally crossing the street, occasionally lingering at the corner. Hannah noticed, with cautious relief, that Kaiser no longer lunged at the fence as aggressively. The dog still tensed, but something in his eyes suggested confusion, rather than outright hatred. Maybe he sensed that Jacob had changed. One day, as winter yielded to early spring, Hannah and Elsa were in the front yard planting tulip bulbs. Kaiser trotted beside them, sniffing each newly turned mound of earth. That's when Jacob approached, stopping a respectful distance from the gate. Hannah's pulse quickened, but she tried to appear calm. Kaiser's ears pricked. He barked a few times, uncertain. Jacob crouched low, avoiding eye contact with the dog in a non-threatening posture. "I'm sorry for intruding," he murmured. I wanted to try something." Hannah looked at him warily. "What is it?" He pulled from his coat pocket a worn leather collar, old-fashioned in design, with faint lettering across the interior. This was Brutus's collar when he was a puppy. I know it might not mean much to him now, but I wanted to offer it, to show you. I'm not here to harm him or reclaim him. Cautious curiosity flickered across Hannah's features. She glanced at Kaiser. The dog stared, ears twitching, muzzle slightly wrinkled. Slowly, gently, Hannah led Kaiser closer to the gate. Jacob extended the collar, letting Kaiser sniff it through the bars. The dog's nose twitched, inhaling the scent of old leather, perhaps faint traces of a puppyhood memory. He let out a hesitant whine, but didn't bark. Jacob's expression hovered between relief and sorrow. For a tense moment, they remained in that fragile truce, an aging man trying to make amends, a German shepherd recalling specters of his past. As weeks melted into spring, the entire Brenner household sensed a subtle shift in Kaiser's demeanor. His nightmares lessened, replaced by quieter nights and calmer days. The daily barking at Jacob continued, but was no longer laced with the same venom. Sometimes Kaiser would merely growl or whine. Other times, he'd bark once or twice, then retreat to the porch, as though uncertain if he should remain angry or let it go. Jacqueline, a family friend and former dog trainer, dropped by to evaluate Kaiser's behavior. She observed him during a mid-morning pass of Jacob. Afterward, she said to Hannah, "He's conflicted. Dogs have powerful associations, sense, images, emotions. Something about Jacob triggers a memory of fear, but there's another layer. He recognizes him, maybe even has a residual bond. With time and gentle exposure, he might let go of the trauma." Hannah took those words to heart. She approached Jacob with a carefully crafted plan. They would stage controlled meetings in the yard. Jacob would stand at a safe distance, Hannah or Martin by Kaiser's side, gradually closing the gap as the dog became more comfortable. The first attempt was tense. Kaiser snarled, lunged on the leash, clearly recalling the old horror. But Jacob, to his credit, spoke softly, addressing Kaiser by his former name, Brutus, though it sounded foreign in that new setting. Over several sessions, the tension eased. Jacob never attempted to pet Kaiser without permission. He showed up with small treats approved by Dr. Hirsch, who insisted that the dog's diet remain balanced. Each time, Jakob placed the treat on the ground and backed away. Slowly, Kaiser began inching toward it, albeit still eyeing Jakob warily. One sunny afternoon in April, after a successful session where Kaiser tolerated Jacob's presence with minimal growling, Jakob asked if he could speak to Hannah alone. They sat on the porch steps, buds of cherry blossoms drifting on the breeze. Martin was inside helping Elsa with homework. Kaiser dozed in a patch of sunlight, keeping one ear perked in case of danger. Jacob cleared his throat, seeming unsure where to begin. "I've decided to sell the old house," he said at last, staring at his hands. "I can't afford the upkeep, and I don't want its memories anymore." Hannah watched his profile, noticing a tautness in his jaw. "I can understand that," she said softly. "I can't imagine the ghosts that must live there." He nodded, eyes distant. "It's full of ghosts, my father's presence, my own shame. But the hardest part is knowing what I did to Brutus, to Kaiser." He picked at a splinter on the wooden step. "I'll never fully forgive myself for leaving him in that environment. If he hates me forever, I deserve it." Hannah sighed, empathy warring with the memory of Kaiser's deep distress. "He's healing," she offered gently. "Dogs can be incredibly resilient. I think in time, he might move past the pain, but it won't happen overnight." Jacob hesitated, then asked a question that caught her off guard. Do you think I could ever take him on a walk? Under supervision, of course. I want to show him I'm not the man I was. I need him to see me differently." The mother in Hannah was protective, but the caretaker in her also understood the power of redemption for both man and dog. "Let's give it a little more time," she replied. "One step at a time." Jacob accepted the answer with a tight nod, though a flicker of hope lit his eyes. In May, the city of Heidelberg bloomed in pastel glory. Tourists flocked to the romantic old town, strolling along the Neckar River, snapping photos of the castle perched high on the hill. The Brenner family, too, spent more time outdoors, enjoying picnics and fresh air. Kaiser reveled in the sunshine, chasing after frisbees with renewed vigor. Yet remnants of his tension remained. If Jacob approached too quickly or made a sudden movement, Kaiser's hackles rose, and he let out a warning bark. One afternoon, while Martin washed the car in the driveway, Kaiser lounged under the shade of a chestnut tree. Jacob came by, carrying a manila envelope. He greeted Martin politely, then knelt at a distance from Kaiser. The dog lifted his head, watching every move. Inside the envelope was a series of old photographs. "I thought you might want these," Jacob said, setting them on the ground, then stepping back. Pictures of Brutus Kaiser when he was a pup. Some with my father, some with me, and a few from the house. Curiosity piqued. Martin crouched to look at them. Hannah, who had been tending to the garden, joined them, Kaiser at her side. Slowly, they sifted through the snapshots. The pictures told a story of a scrawny German shepherd puppy, ears too big for his head, bounding around a neglected backyard. There was one image of a younger Jacob smiling, holding the pup in his arms. Kaiser watched. It was eerie how the dog's gaze seemed to flick from the pictures to Jacob, as if recognizing echoes of a distant life. Martin studied one photo showing a tall, stern-looking man, likely Georg Leitner, holding a shotgun while Brutus cowered in the corner. A shiver ran up Martin's spine. "That's my father," Jacob muttered. He had a nasty temper. Anger flared in Martin's eyes. Kaiser deserved better than that. Jacob lowered his head. Yes, he did. Silence stretched as the old ghost took shape on the glossy prints. In that silent confrontation with the past, Kaiser let out a low whine, pressing closer to Hannah. She stroked his ears, offering reassurance. Martin carefully returned the photos to the envelope and handed them back to Jacob. "You should keep them," Martin said solemnly. "It's your history, for better or worse." Jacob hesitated. "You're sure?" Martin nodded. "Just promise that, if you find more pictures, we'd like to see them. It might help Kaiser heal." Jacob offered a grateful, if tentative, smile. Of course, he replied. Then he stood, walking away with the envelope tucked beneath his arm, shoulders burdened by old regrets. Summer arrived in Heidelberg, with golden sunlight dancing on the Neckar's surface. The city's charm was in full bloom, with sidewalk cafes bustling and children eating gelato in the Marktplatz. The Brenners thrived in this warm season. Elsa rode her bicycle with friends, Martin grilled bratwursts on weekends, and Hannah tended a vegetable patch that thrived under her diligent care. Kaiser strolled through it all, still watchful but increasingly at ease. Jacob had put his house on the market. Potential buyers visited the old Leitner property, reacting with varying degrees of dismay at its neglected state. Sometimes Hannah spotted him overseeing showings from a distance, face drawn, as though each step reminded him of the ghosts that lingered there. Despite the swirl of daily life, Kaiser and Jacob continued their supervised interactions. Occasionally, Jacob brought Kaiser a treat approved by Dr. Hirsch to ensure it was healthy and placed it gently at the dog's feet. Kaiser still eyed him warily, but he no longer snarled or lunged. Bit by bit, it seemed a shaky understanding formed between them. One afternoon, Hannah decided it was time to try something new. She invited Jacob into the fenced yard for a carefully orchestrated meeting. Martin was there, along with Jacqueline, the dog trainer friend, standing by in case Kaiser reacted badly. Jacob approached slowly, hands visible, posture relaxed. Kaiser paced, uncertain, letting out a quiet warning bark but not retreating. "Easy, boy," Hannah murmured, placing a reassuring hand on the dog's flank. "He's not here to hurt you." Jacob kneeled a few paces away, arms at his sides, letting Kaiser come to him if he chose. A tense minute passed. Finally, Kaiser took a step forward, nose twitching at the man's scent. Another slow step. Hannah felt her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment. With painstaking caution, Kaiser sniffed Jacob's outstretched palm. The man remained still as stone, tears shining in his eyes. Kaiser let out a soft rumble, uncertain, then moved away. A small gesture, but for Jacob, it felt like absolution. "Thank you," he whispered, mostly to the dog. Something unspoken and profound lingered in that quiet space, a fragile step toward healing for them both. Late August brought the sale of the old Leitner house. A family from Munich purchased it, planning a massive renovation to restore its once stately design. Jacob packed his few possessions, intending to leave Heidelberg for a second time, this time of his own choosing. He had no illusions about rewriting the past, but he wanted a future unburdened by the sins of his father. Before leaving, he visited the Brenners one last time. They stood in the front yard, the sun casting long shadows on a lazy, late summer afternoon. Jacob handed Martin an envelope. "I found more photos," he said, voice steady with resignation, "and some documents, my father's old notes about Brutus's training schedule. Maybe you'll understand him better than I ever could." Hannah and Martin accepted it with gratitude. Elsa hovered near Kaiser, who was panting in the heat. Finally, Jacob turned to face the dog. Gently, hesitantly, he reached out a trembling hand. Kaiser took a step forward, sniffed his palm, and then let the man briefly scratch behind his ear. It was a brief, fleeting touch, no grand display of affection, but a moment of quiet acceptance. A wave of emotion passed through Jacob's face. He closed his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, not just to Kaiser, but to the Brenners, to the city, to all the years overshadowed by guilt. With a final nod to Martin and Hannah, he slung a battered bag over his shoulder and walked down the cobblestone street. This time, Kaiser did not bark. In the months that followed, life settled back into a peaceful rhythm. Kaiser seemed lighter, as if shedding the vestiges of old scars. While he would likely never forget his traumatic past, the daily anxiety that once consumed him was gone. Instead, he chased frisbees in the yard, trotted along the river with Martin, and waited by Elsa's bedroom door at night to keep her company until she fell asleep. Hannah occasionally opened the envelope Jacob left behind. The photos and notes were a testament to the life, Kaiser had endured a chaotic swirl of shadowy dealings and fear-based training. Yet now, the dog's present reality was filled with love, family, and safety. The distance between past and present felt immeasurable. On warm evenings, the Brenners sometimes thought about Jacob Leitner. They didn't know exactly where he'd gone. Perhaps he was forging a new life, free from the old shackles of Heidelberg. But one thing was certain. He had granted them and Kaiser a truth that was painful, yet liberating. In that truth, there was a strange sort of mercy. Because of it, Kaiser's barking vigil had ended, replaced by a gentle watchfulness over the home he had finally learned to trust with his whole heart. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of healing, second chances, and the unbreakable bond between a loyal German shepherd and the family that gave him hope. Together, we've witnessed Kaiser's transformation from a dog haunted by his past to one who found the courage and love to trust again. His unwavering spirit reminds us that sometimes the most profound battles are fought not on distant fields, but within our own hearts. If you were moved by Kaiser's story and believe in the power of resilience and redemption, we invite you to support us by liking this video, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing to our channel for more heartfelt stories. Every click helps spread hope and compassion, guiding us toward a world where all animals, and humans alike, can find understanding and a place to call home. Thank you for watching.